Chapter 2, Tender Wings of Desire. Contrary to popular belief, rather the beliefs of her mother and sister, Madeline did not mind getting dressed up. Well, the fact of the matter was that she absolutely loathed the process of getting dressed, but was always quite happy with the finished product. Sure, corsets pinched and the wide hoops of her skirt made her feel as though she were bigger than she actually was, but it did not matter. Sometimes she still enjoyed being pretty. And pretty she was on the night of the ball, but of course she had to be, given her future status as a woman engaged to a dude. The entire thing had yet to sit well with her, but she also knew that not much could be done about the matter. Instead, she focused on the wide, petal pink ball gown trimmed with green ribbons that brought out the color of her eyes. Her mother even lent her a gorgeous emerald necklace in order to set off everything. Sure, it felt as if it had taken Madeline hours to put on the heavy old thing, but the effect, she had to admit, was rather lovely. She just wished that she could feel at least some measure of excitement about what was to come. Victoria, on the other hand, was almost beside herself with excitement. Dressed entirely in white, as unmarried ladies often did before their debuts, her hair put up in a gorgeous bun with curls hanging down, she looked like some sort of angel put on earth to attend the ball, and Madeline was sure she felt that way too. Of course, she wasn't going to be allowed to dance as late as Madeline, and Papa might go apoplectic. I don't know if that's the right way to say that word, at the idea of his daughter accepting dances from anyone at this ball at all, but it was Victoria's very first time, so excitement abounded. Madeline herself did not mind balls. Dancing was fun, although she wasn't very good at it, and it was nice to see all the beautiful gowns. She hated to make a habit of it, though, for conversations often ran dry and she ended up so bored. Instead, she would seek out anyone who had been traveling lately in the hopes that they would regale her with tales of their travels. She was particularly looking forward to this evening because Lord Hornby had only recently returned from Bombay, and Madeline wanted to hear his stories about the culture. Then there was the small matter of Madeline's engagement being announced that very evening, but how could that be very interesting to many people? They were announced by the butler when they entered the ballroom, the ball itself being thrown by some wealthy family friend that Madeline could never keep straight. Victoria hovered by her side, her eyes widening with excitement as she took in her surroundings, the sumptuous table with little nibbles laid out for the guests to enjoy, the servants sprinkled throughout the crowd holding trays of champagne. Madeline knew that she would be allowed to have a glass of champagne to toast her own engagement. That alone should have been enough to excite her, but nothing seemed to work. "Oh, Maddie, look!" Victoria whispered as they lingered at the top of the stairs. She knew better than to point, but instead made a gesture with her fan toward the entrance of the room. "Look, there he is." It was Dude Reginald, tall and handsome in his tuxedo and tails, his blonde hair slicked back as if he were some kind of romantic hero. Madeline knew that her heart should beat faster upon seeing him, and he did, in fact, cut a very attractive figure as he took note of her and walked over to the two ladies, but all Madeline could feel in her heart was a growing pit of unease. Reginald arrived at her side with a grin. "There you are, sweetheart," he said genially. He truly was a nice man, and he offered his arm for Madeline to take hold of. She stared at him for a moment, until Victoria nudged her rather roughly, and Madeline realized that it was her duty to be escorted in this way. "Oh, thank you." Madeline slipped her arm through his, feeling the closeness of his skin. She wished she could feel some thrill, whatever excitement a woman was supposed to feel about her beloved, but instead she felt nothing. Victoria beamed at the two of them as if she was some sort of fairy bestowing blessings. "You are looking lovely this evening, Lady Madeline," Reginald said. "Oh, please call me Madeline, dude," Madeline replied awkwardly. "Then you must call me Reginald." "All right." Reginald seemed pleased with this, and he turned his eye to Victoria, who seemed startled at the sudden attention. "You are looking very beautiful this evening too, Lady Victoria. I am sure loads of lucky boys will line up to get a dance with you this evening." "Oh!" Victoria's cheeks reddened so much that she covered them with her own hands in embarrassment. "Oh, thank you, but I haven't debuted yet. Would it not be a scandal to dance?" Reginald chuckled good-naturedly. "It is only a scandal if you get caught." Madeline hadn't thought her sister could blush any deeper, but there she was, snapping her fan open and hiding behind the beautiful fabric. Madeline tried to hide her smirk at the entire exchange, and the three of them walked into the ballroom. A small orchestra played some song in the corner that Madeline wasn't able to identify, but that wasn't exactly the kind of song one would actually dance to. The music floated through the air as guests greet each other, and Madeline's mother came swooping in, seemingly out of nowhere, dressed in a spectacular sapphire blue dress with jewels to match. Having once been the beauty of the ton, she was increasingly unwilling to release that title, no matter how old she was. Madeline did admire that about her, but not as much as Victoria did. "Oh, darling dude, I see you found your betrothed." As if the Duke were of lesser stature, he might have blushed. Instead, he simply smiled and kissed Mamma's hand in greeting. "Yes, I have, Lady Dahlia, and I am very happy to do so." "Oh, please, you'll be calling me Mamma soon enough," she cried with a swat of her fan. "I suppose you better get used to it." "Call such a young woman such an old-sounding name?" Reginald said with obvious charm. "I could never." Mamma laughed as her cheeks flushed, and for a moment Madeline knew exactly what Victoria would look like when she got older. It wasn't such a bad look. "You are too much. Our Madeline is going to have her hands full with you." The sudden use of her name snapped Madeline back to earth, surprising her in a way that almost embarrassed her. Suddenly, being shoved into the spotlight overwhelmed her a bit. Although she desperately wanted to simply be ignored during this outing, she knew that would not happen any time soon, thanks to the news that would be announced right before the dancing. A gong rang to signify that dinner was ready in the next room, and Reginald gave her arm a soft pat. "May I escort you into the dining room?" he asked her gently. She smiled at him and nodded. They walked together, leaving Victoria and her mother to find their own way, and suddenly she felt very strange. It was the first time that she'd been out in public paired up with him, and although she knew that it was bound to happen one day, the fact that it was happening at that very moment was shocking to her. How was she going to go through the rest of her life being a dudess if she could barely process the idea of wearing the coronet right now? "You look beautiful tonight," Reginald said as he sat beside her. Her mouth went dry, and she reached for the glass of red wine before her. She was barely old enough to get away with drinking wine at dinner, and she knew that no matter what, she wasn't allowed to drink to excess, so she wet her lips with the sweet-tasting wine and desperately tried to think of something witty to say. That was her strength, right? "Thank you," she replied dumbly. Was that all she had? Reginald smiled. His eyes were so kind, and yet the pit in Madeline's stomach grew wider and wider. "You look nice too," she added, cursing herself terribly for sounding like such a fool. He looked down at his plate, but Madeline could see the ghost of a smile on his lips. At least she could make him happy. The rest of dinner went without a hitch, with delicious food and lively conversation. Madeline never really knew how to conduct herself in situations like these, which only made her think about her role as a dudess even more. Wouldn't it be her job to host parties? To birth children? Wouldn't she have to be charming in a perfectly wonderful yet unthreatening way? Did she want all of that? Her fears grew and grew until the moment her father tapped his knife against his wine glass and stood. "I would like to thank our gracious hosts for a wonderful meal, and before we all begin dancing, I just want to announce the engagement of our dear daughter, Lady Madeline Parker, and the Dude of Sainsbury, Reginald Lewis. They will be married in the spring." A hush fell over the rather large table as everyone turned to look at the couple. Madeline could feel Victoria's eyes on her, brimming with a sort of joyous envy and happiness. She felt Reginald beside her, beaming proudly. Madeline forced her expression into a smile. The spring? It was already late February. Spring would arrive before she knew it. Suddenly the reality of it all came crashing down on her head. Reginald reached for her hand on the top of the table, giving it a light squeeze that should have made her heart skip a beat, but instead just made her skin crawl. She would not admit it then, but that was when her plan began to take shape.